Welcome to For Advisors by Advisors. I'm your host, Evan J. Mayer. And today we have a very, very special guest in Mr. Michael Gordon. Very excited to have you on.
Not sure I had a round of applause since my last softball game. That's exciting.
Got to wake you up. It's Laguna Beach time, so it's what, 11:30, 35 there now?
Yep, still working East Coast time, but what ends up happening, Evan, is days just go longer. So I'm super thrilled to be here. I'm so happy for you and excited. I know getting started with the podcast, a lot of people do it. I think I heard a stat the other day that like 50% of podcasts never get past one episode. So I'm excited to see what you continue to do, and I'm really grateful to be on with you.
Yeah, man, it's awesome. We're like, I don't know, we're about eight, 9 episodes in and having fun. And we'll see where it goes, you know? I was scouring the podcast landscape, and I think I said this in my initial one, and it was, it was recruitment, coaching, like everything but financial advisors that were on here. And the ones that were financial advisors were trying to do it for clients and not for advisors. So I thought, this might be cool. So anyway, who is Mike? Mike is a consultant and guide to financial advisors. He actually went independent about a year ago. It was about a year ago, right?
Yeah, it was a year ago this past weekend. So it's been quite the journey. And as you can imagine, I love hearing more about your story and listening to past episodes. Kind of have this knack to want to do my own thing. There's a few things. So I've got a business owner as a dad. So you kind of had the itch. But, married with 4 kids. So I love my family life. And then you get dependents and responsibilities. But here I am coaching advisors and acting as a consultant, and then trying to teach my kids about following their own dreams and passions. And I would call myself a hypocrite, but I'm not doing the same thing, right? And so it's like a lot of advisors that change firms and go independent. I like to think that there's a greater purpose and a calling and a plan for your life, but sometimes things have to happen behind the scenes. So for some advisors, it could be payout cuts. It could be, maybe you didn't become equity partner. And there were a whole slew of reasons for me that don't really matter for your show. But yeah, finally kind of feel like I've got a seat at the table. And so when I'm talking to folks like you and your counterparts and peers, it feels very much more like a conversation and friends, because we've gone through it somewhat together or somewhat similarly with, and if I can do it without a book of business behind me with no revenues, it's like, I got to believe that most advisors could do it, bring in their book of business with them too.
Yeah, so it's all about relationships. Mike is the founder of themichaelgordon.com, so you can find out a lot about what Mike does from the website. My first few interviews are kind of people I've known for a while, so I don't know Mike's whole story, but I do know that the people that know Mike spoke extremely highly about him. And I had seen your videos, very similar to Anthony Ruffalo's and Nick. I already knew Nick Nielsen. I already knew, and then all of a sudden your videos started popping up, and it was a different spin on our business because you were not a financial advisor, but your job was to basically get advisors to find their path and what was their best path going forward. And I thought your videos were always inspiring. And then, you had moved from North Carolina to Laguna Beach, and your opening video was about you being in Laguna Beach and taking that step. And I thought that was really neat. Tell us a little bit about you, Mike, where you've been in this business, what you've been doing, and then what you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah. Great question. It's, Nick's one of my best friends. Ruff is great. So I'm definitely in good company with those guys. But I grew up in this business across the desk from you guys as a wholesaler. So come out of Rollins, there was no law school, no MBA. Mom and dad were kind of like, okay, well, you're going to get a job, right? And well, of course, I'm ambitious, motivated, probably would have stayed in school to get an MBA, but decided to get in our business. And one of the first places was the Hartford Planko. So way back when Hartford Planko was the distribution arm of the Hartford. They had purchased them, obviously, but they gave young guys and gals a chance. So coming out of school, 21, 22, you get your 763, all those things, and you become an internal or sit on the desk. And from day one, went in early, stay late, had presentations. Gosh, guys like Charlie Fry, Jim Lake, Colin Lake, all these wonderful people that have mostly since moved on, Jeff Reese, and got a taste for the business that way. So wholesale for almost 11 years, and it was great. I loved it. Wish I had maybe had a 5-year start. Kind of missed like the glory days of that. But you just learn a lot, right? I used to have the jokes of, well, I've got socks and other garments older than you. What could you potentially teach me about the business? And the idea was, well, nothing, but I know what all the other top advisors, top producers are doing within my territory. And so you bring good ideas, you try to bring value. And then, like most good places, you either grow your territory and they cut it, or you don't and you get fired. So giving a 22-year-old a chance to do that and to kind of have that kind of influence was a great launching pad. And then settling down, getting married and building a family wasn't the most conducive lifestyle. And I was very fortunate that my parents were both really present. Looking back, I know my dad missed the first few years of childhood just from working and being a business owner, but he never missed anything. So I wanted that as well. And I had this bright idea of, let me get off the road and go be a recruiter for one of the nation's largest broker dealers. And it dawned on me that, like, well, you're going to be on the road probably almost just as much. Yeah. And so I wholesale for 10, 11 years, recruited corporately for a major independent broker dealer for almost 2. And then after that, like to think I was a big part of building one of the nation's fastest and largest growing hybrid RIA firms, also affiliated with that BD. And, one thing led to another. And just try to be a consultant. In fact, people used to kind of give me a hard time because it was like, well, it's like you just try to be a consultant. And that was the point. If you want to be in this business and have a reputation, not every advisor is a good fit for your firm and vice versa. So I wouldn't, there were a lot of folks we wouldn't bring on, or I would shy away, or I'd refer to a buddy or another firm. And then what ended up happening is you kind of lose control of the relationships. Sometimes it went really well. Sometimes it went sideways. It's not similar to like selling away, right? But I lost a relationship, and it wasn't necessarily about the money, but I wasn't able to finish kind of what we started. And so having an itch to do what you did 3 years ago, I wanted to take the plunge, and here we are. It's been a year and 2 days, and you just learn a lot when you can kind of zoom out and look at the landscape from a different perspective. You learn who's doing what, who's good, who's bad, who can play offense, who can play defense, who can do both. And so the idea right now is you're totally independent. I'm not rooting for one firm. I'm not trying to slam you into one firm. It's sitting on the same side of the table, much like a financial plan, and saying, hey, what do you want? What do you want to accomplish? Where do you want to go? And then I'm here to help you avoid the mistakes, save a ton of time, and reduce the stress, all while providing clarity and finding a new broker dealer or an RIA, and in many cases, this past year, helping advisors sell their business.
Yeah, and that's a huge thing going on in our business as people are aging, and the need for people to want to sell their business. There's obviously a lot more buyers than there are sellers in our business. It's a very crowded space. You mentioned something about working for, hybrid. It's funny because when I came from the bank channel, there are people that come from the wirehouse or the insurance side of things. And the initial thought is where do you go on the next path? And the initial path was independence. And there, you've heard RIA, you've heard independence. The hybrid, you don't hear much about because it's kind of, it's honestly hidden. And when I went out and looked, independence to me was purely independence. And then when I went independent, which I've been for 3 years now, you're learning there's all these other kind of channels where you could have, your fee-based business or your advisory business through one arm, through the hybrid model of an RIA, and you could have your brokerage business through the broker dealer. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know about that prior. I still don't know if I would have made my decision any different. I'm happy with that route that I went, but it's interesting. And then you have the pure RIA side of the house. So when did the hybrid model start coming into existence from your knowledge base point? And then you're seeing it evolve dramatically over the last few years. What's spurring that?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. And I make the distinction often, you need, as an advisor, you need to know so many things. You need to know the lingo, the language, how do you speak, what stuff means. You go to your doctor, they need to be able to communicate to other professionals. And in my world, I often see so many times, and I'm not trying to criticize folks, but a lot of folks that do what I do or that are kind of in our field, they don't really understand the language and the acronyms and all those things. And it's important because you need to understand what on earth you're actually talking about. And so when I call and I'm talking to folks, RIAs were popping up, late 80s, you had a handful, 90s, it got bigger. And I would say, mid to late 2000s, you saw more and more attraction. So you kind of had this old guard of, and a lot of my experience wholesaling was mainly independents, some regionals and banks, but you have this OSJ model that, they were duly registered, right? Not to get boring here, but that means your RIA and your broker dealer are all the same, right? Whether it's Merrill or Wells or Edward Jones or, any other independents, everything goes through one firm. The hybrid came because of a few things. Typically, when you create an RIA, advisors, they are tired of overpaying for value that they don't perceive or think they're getting. And they want control and autonomy over their compliance and to do different things. And so you saw this movement where, hey, I'm not ready to give up my legacy book of business. And we can talk about what is a fiduciary. That's probably not for this topic, but can you be a fiduciary if you don't have access to a broker dealer? Many people would argue, well, no, you can't. So I can maintain my legacy business, write my annuities and my funds and 529s, and then build up my fee-based business. What hybrid is not being duly registered with the same firm and doing advisory business. Like that's not it. Hybrid, in my definition, means your broker dealer and your RIA are separate. So you have a detached RIA, which means I'm not leveraging the corporate ADV. I'm leveraging my own or somebody else's if I plug in or tuck in or I'm part of an aggregator model. But the mid 2000s, late 2000s, and then obviously the last 10 or 12 years, it's exploded. You've got the firms that started earliest, obviously have gotten a competitive advantage in terms of size and numbers. But what's intriguing is, I think firms that have come a little bit later, it's kind of like the iPhone and BlackBerry. You got to see all the mistakes and what not to do. You can really build out your firm and maybe be a little bit more specific instead of trying to be all things to all people and having 500, 600, 700 advisors. Maybe I've got 35 or 40 advisor clients, but I own 20% of their business, and they can outsource all the stuff you don't want to do.
So in that RIA spot where you create your own RIA, right, and you're not duly registered, so you're creating your own ADV and your brand. I mean, a lot of on the independent side, we are kind of creating our own brand that when you are duly registered. But what are some of the things that somebody would want to be duly registered? Not duly registered. Have a separate RIA. What are some of the things that you can do that you couldn't do if you were duly registered?
Great question. So when you think about some of the biggest firms and even some of the smaller to mid-size broker dealers, where you got 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 advisors, you're leveraging one ADV. And we know the broker dealer model is dying mainly because of margins and it's hard to scale. So how do you reinvest and invest in technology and service and support and give capital to your advisors to do all the stuff they need to do? They try to keep everything on one platform. And you're essentially, I don't want to say you're solving for the lowest common denominator, but you could have 990 advisors that are amazing and 10 that are maybe problem children. You're solving for that. So the best advisor in the broker dealer is being treated the same way as potentially the worst, maybe not from a service standpoint, but from the ADV standpoint. So the idea of saying, okay, I can use you for my broker dealer business and I can have my own RIA will provide more freedom, more flexibility. It could be doing coaching, consulting, maybe you want to do flat fee financial planning, whatever it is. And the other, I would say from a custodial standpoint, access to multiple custodians. So from a retail client acquisition standpoint, if you want to be at Fidelity and not LPL, Raymond James, or Schwab, well, great. We've got access to any one of them, and maybe one custodian's better at one thing versus another. But it's freedom and autonomy. You're not quite ready to go RIA only, and then we hear this unlock value all the time. If you wanted to do like one of those bingo drinking games, right? Like what are the corporate buzzwords? You talk about, well, if I actually own my own RIA, or if I become more free, it's this process or evolution of becoming more independent. As I become more and more independent, I have more and more control, which means I can fetch a greater valuation. And so ultimately the freedom and the economics are what's pushing it. And broker dealers they've had to be so restricted for obvious reasons, DOL, compliance costs.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
There's obviously a few things. The multiple custodians is a huge advantage, or could be considered a huge advantage. The payout of potentially an acquisition or a merger situation gives you more value in your brand because it is technically separated, and then gives you a little bit more control on the ADV stuff, which makes could make a lot of sense for some. And I asked you something on the phone yesterday, and you said, it depends. It's all strokes for different folks. The goal of this podcast is to be kind of open architecture. Now, you were recruiting for an RIA slash, hybrid model. Now, I see posts from you, and sometimes you put certain company names. Are those the company names that you're kind of looking for, or like, what as a consultant? And I guess Nick had said this on his podcast, that the one thing he wishes he had done was a consultant for a while and really limit it down to 4 or 5 great places and kind of just target on those 4 or 5 great places. Where are you targeting today?
Yeah, it's really all over the map. And so I hear this a lot. Well, we've got access to 120 or 150 agreements, and I've got several dozen agreements, plus there's broker dealers, there's RIA onlys, there's hybrids, there's OSJs, and sometimes you get a one-off or an exception. As an example, maybe you're using like an asset marker, an SEI, and you need an RIA that has a selling agreement. Well, that's very specific. Maybe you've got some proprietary type products that can't go anywhere. Well, that's very specific. So with what I'm trying to do, because a lot of folks, what I'm trying not to do is just pass leads and pass names and then say, all right, Evan, deuces, you're on your own, and here's the 3 top firms, because a lot of people do that. So it's, I don't need to work with everybody in the world, just like you don't, right? But you've got a few independents that offer, and your first podcast episode, I listened to your story. You wanted that, hey, I'm going independent, but it's nice to have a big name behind me. And I truly don't think you have to have that big name behind you, but I can see how that's a hang up for a lot of folks. So whether that's LPL or Raymond James or Fidelity, like, okay, you've got it, it's on the statement. People feel really good about that. I'm doing a lot of succession planning type work. There are several hybrids that I'm involved with because of necessity. And there's some folks that are, they're coming from a wirehouse, and we know all the names, and they're a little bit nervous about going independent. And quite honestly, some of them, they want support, they want help, they need transition assistance up front to help them with that first 3 to 6 months while there's a disruption to the cash flow. And so it just depends. But what I'm not trying to do is say, where do you want to be for the next couple of years? It's really stepping back and zooming out and saying, all right, what do you want? What do you want to build? Right? It's kind of like, if you remember the movie Wedding Crashers, and Claire is I think she's looking at flowers with her dad, and the actor's name is escaping me, and he's like, what do you want? And she's like, well, I don't know. And he's like, no, Claire, like, which flowers, right? So it's like a lot of times we go through this discovery phase where I've had actually advisors break up during it because they just realized they wanted 2 different things. Now, it's not ideal, but it's better to find out early than later. Some folks are looking for strategic partners to help them acquire businesses. Some folks want to help with acquiring CPAs, and some have a bigger vision of, hey, I don't want to do everything myself. So I always kind of chuckle when I hear this, like, advisors, CE movement, and these different things. And then everybody wants to be a CEO.
Well, it's funny you say that. Yeah, 2 people in this week who, they like the idea of going independent and they like the idea of building the practice, but they do not want to worry about payroll, rent, and aspects, and they're looking for more of a turnkey approach. And it's interesting, but as I've talked to people, and a lot of people, I probably sat down with 30 people in the last 3 years that were considering going independent or considering, staying where they were. And it was, my whole thing is I've always been very holistic in that, the way this business works, you can go a multitude of different ways and make those decisions on what you may want to do.
And we touched upon this, but I think we tabled it for today. And you were at SunTrust was great. I mean, spending half my life in the Southeast, and I'm back there every month for a couple weeks at a time. So I'm kind of bi-coastal. You mentioned California, but I'm back and forth all the time. So you had some of these good stable banks like a SunTrust, and it was great, right? It was just hard to scale and do what they needed to do. So you've got some good firms like that, but for the most part, when your peers left SunTrust, I talked to Nick about this. The branch manager, ironically, these guys end up doing different things now and now are recruiting independents. So you kind of have to be careful with how you treat your advisors, but they'll lie. They blatantly just flat out lie and say, oh, well, Evan only brought 30% of his book of business. Well, it's like, well, no, I've got 300 million. I'm doing all right. So you have a lot of that. You got the head trash, you got the noise. It's already daunting and kind of scary on its own. And you've got kids and family lives and these clients, and who's going to come with you? And so, and a lot of times the executives, the suits, the same people that have been getting paid to implement this culture that now are going independent. And that's a whole nother conversation. It's not a bad thing. It's just, it's ironic.
It's ironic.
They tell you that you can't make it. The technology stinks. You don't have the big name behind you. You can't do it on your own. And so there's been a gap that's been filled with some really good firms that offer these premium services where they can take down space. They can, they can put the RIA in their name, and they can almost like a sublease and transfer it to you when you're ready. And there's some of the bigger aggregators that do that as well. And the challenge that I have with that is, I think it's okay for a couple of years if you've got, if you've got freedom and flexibility to be like, okay, I'm good now, I'm going to go back to an independent grid. Because what's happening is after 6, 12, 18 months that you kind of get your sea legs under you, you realize, well, I'm paying an extra 20, 30, 40 basis points than all my peers are paying. And if I'm doing $2, $3, $4, $5, $6, $10 million of revenue or production, and you're paying a couple extra $1 million, why are you doing that? I mean, there's a lot of opportunity there to unlock value and take some of that power away from the big banks and do it yourself.
Yeah.
But you got to be careful about overpaying for something just because you're scared. And then when you realize that in 2 years, do you have the freedom to kind of reverse course? And that's where a lot of advisors are getting stuck.
As far as people that shouldn't, we always talk about people that should go, and, the entrepreneurial and the, the free thinkers who shouldn't be thinking about going independent, RIA, hybrid, who should stay in the wirehouses or in the banks?
It's a great question, because I heard you ask your recruiter that on one of your, I guess it was a handful of episodes ago. And I was thinking about that question, and it's easy to say like, oh, anybody with the desire should do it. And you couldn't say that, 3, 4, 5 years ago, but, in a lot of ways, I think our business hasn't changed at all. I know that's kind of an odd thing to probably say, but obviously technology, the advancement of support and different types of models have really helped. If you're 60, 65 and you don't have it in you and you want to take the sunset agreement, I guess for the right advisors, the bigger advisors has gotten better, and I can see you kind of staying put. So if you don't have the desire to, and you're kind of gonna do it haphazardly, that's probably not a good thing. If you've got a lot of institutional type of clients, muni bonds and some of those things, like I know one of the firms you've discussed in the past, they've got some good solutions there, or if you're SMA heavy, it's really difficult. It's hard for you to put a type of business on it, because even like the 401k space, there's some amazing firms out there that can help you do a lot of things. There's institutional level support and service. You've got SMAs, and firms are building out their capabilities. I would just say it's more of a mental thing. If you don't have it in you, well, then don't waste your time. But where I would challenge those folks is, do you have kids in the business? What's your legacy going to look like? And a lot of folks, I'm helping some folks sell their business now. They don't need a penny from the sale of the business. And so it's like, okay, well, what does your legacy look like? Would you like to build out a team? Would you like to take some associate advisors with you and grow it out and build it and unlock value? And maybe with your money that you don't need, maybe start a foundation or a charity or go invest into something else. So I'm very big on just helping your local community and giving back your time, whatever that looks like. But it's hard for me to say that there's a type of person or a type of business that shouldn't make the move, other than you got to be up for it. And I don't know what that looks like. Is it 51%? But because there's so much support and help, it makes it easier than ever. But to make a move just to pick up an extra 10 points, probably not worth it.
Yeah, that I agree. If it's, I think on one of the other interviews we had, if somebody said if it's for the money, you're doing it for the wrong reason, and especially if it's 10 basis points.
I don't know if either one of us answered it really well, because probably sound like an attorney. Like you kind of get this vague answer, but it's a personal gut check.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I can help you all day, and there's services where people can help you call clients and do those things, but they need to hear from you or someone on your team. If you're not up for doing that, well then stay put, sail off into the sunset, and call it a day. But there's less impediments than there used to be. Like if I can go look for office space and give you access to a CFO and a virtual content marketing officer and a practice management person, and I can give you 1 times revenue maybe 1.5, depending on how you're going to affiliate. I mean, there's models out there that allow you to go. It's like this quasi model where you can be W-2 for benefits, insurance, 401k, all of those things and
Yeah.
taxes, but you can own your brand and you can own your clients. And then once your note's forgiven, you want to be careful with this one, because I've heard some folks in the past where you go to one of the bigger firms that has this multi-channel approach and they say, oh, well, go W-2 and then in 7 years you can go independent. But a lot of times guys and gals will get stuck in that model. So you want to be very specific within that contract and make sure you have the flexibility of doing that.
Flexibility is very important. And yeah, there are, I think one of the misconceptions is if you do go independent or go RIA, or, that if you are paid 1099, that you can't get access to group health insurance and that you can't have a payroll company. There are payroll companies, we're actually going to have Insperity on in a couple of weeks that talks a little bit about, what they did. And, they've been extremely helpful for me. And there's a few other ones. They just happen to price the best for me at the time. And, I get calls every 6 months re-looking back at that. So there's huge opportunity. Let me ask you this. On the sale aspect of the business, the acquisition, there's a lot of advisors that are going to be retiring over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years that are working in the banks and working in the wirehouses. And some of them are like, you know what, I'm going to sunset. Many that I've spoke to have said, I'm just going to sunset. It's an easier situation. I can get in and out. What are they missing that they shouldn't be missing when, it might take an extra year of work, but the payday might be, very high?
Yeah, the inertia or the lack of will or the lack of wanting. It's the same issue that we all probably have with do-it-yourselfers, for people that are starting investing late. Same thing happens with advisors. And don't want to pick on, men here, but, as a dad of 4, sometimes I need to kind of come around, right? Like my wife may want me to do something, but drop me a crumb and I'll eventually get on board, right? So we're slow to change naturally. But I think that's the wrong approach. There's a couple different things. I mean, the economics of it all, when you get that sunset agreement, right, you're paying ordinary income taxes. Like that's a huge disadvantage. Obviously, if you set up your acquisition right, if you're going from a W-2 world to the independent world, you don't want to sell within that first year. Like you've got to have that first year under your belt in order to pay, a capital gains, right, or distribution taxes. So there's just more help and support. And if you can take an associate advisor with you, because think about the business, and I think you and I are the same age, 42. When you started at the wirehouse or the bank 20, 30 years ago, things were way different. Do you think your team in 10 years ago or 10 years from now will have the same advantages that you do? And so I don't want to be insensitive when I say this, but if you care about your team at all, because at some point it can't be about you. Now you might say, well, I'm selling my business in junior, Susie or Johnny can buy my business. That's great. But now they're locked in at the wirehouse for the next 10 years. They're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So it's got to be more than just about you. And even if you have enough money, because very rarely for these top wirehouse advisors and producers, they've got more than enough money. And that's why they kind of just sunset, right, and sail off, because they don't need to. But what's the legacy play? Is there an opportunity to set up your associate advisors and your staff and put them in a better spot? Maybe you help them achieve their goals and dreams and aspirations.
That could be legacy for the clients as well. I mean,
yeah, and I'm not.
Who are you going to be leaving your clients to? Do you like when I was in the bank channel, if I looked around at a radius of 50 miles, there was not an advisor. I was like, oh yeah, my clients are going to be happy with that advisor.
Yeah, and I don't mean to be dismissive. I mean, obviously the retail clients, and that's paramount. But with what I do, I truly believe this with my whole heart. If I make sure that folks like Evan or Nick or Rob, if you guys are in a really good spot and you're thriving and doing great and firing on all cylinders, you naturally are going to be able to take better care of your clients. So if I can take care of the advisors, you all will be able to take care of your clients as best as you see fit, Brock.
So, in talking about that and talking about people that are, going to leave a broker dealer or, leave a wirehouse or a bank channel or even an insurance channel and are looking to eventually sell, one of the things that we're seeing out there, and we talked about this briefly yesterday, it's kind of the, and again, without mentioning names, but these OSJs that are now kind of teaming up with investment bankers to offer, buyout solutions and things that are coming along those lines. That now, when I initially went independent, I never was kind of breached into that. And it seems to be, when I'm on in the morning and I'm looking at, FA magazine or some of these, it's another investment bank buying another RIA or independent practice. Have you been seeing that evolve pretty quickly? And where do you think that all ends up going?
It's been fast and furious, Evan. It's fascinating because obviously as a business owner, you have every right to pivot, change your model, to go after opportunities as you see fit. The challenges are, and this is kind of like the AUM versus flat fee model. The challenge is you have these independent advisors, and some of these firms have fiercely independent clients. And if you're the advisor that falls in that wheelhouse, I don't know, I don't want to pick an age because there's younger advisors getting out of the business too to pursue other opportunities. But if you're 58, 60, 62, 65, maybe you want to do a sell and stay for a couple of years, or maybe you want to sell and be done in 9 months. And that's great for the OSJ, the RIA, the hybrid RIA that's acquiring and expanding their margins and their opportunities. So you're essentially wholesaling your constituents. Where it's not great is for those advisors that are wanting to do the same thing, or they're younger and growing. And it's a conflict. And so it's like, it's really difficult to manage $3, $4, $5 million of revenue and then also run this RIA, because if an advisor calls and a client calls, by nature, you probably need to take your investor or your retail client's call. And so unless you can replace yourself or build out a team and then actually empower them to make decisions, it's tough. And so you're seeing this kind of, everything's merging together, right? So now you have your BD that wants to acquire. Now your OSJ or RIA wants to acquire, or they're selling part of your revenue to a capital partner. When it comes time to reinvest human resources and capital, where are they going to invest? The independent advisor, where they're just maybe taking a marginal haircut, or to the team and advisor that they own 20, 30, 40% of the revenue, or maybe they own the entire thing. And it's different than being at SunTrust or Wells because you own your book. But it's the same thing that when these CEOs wake up, if they actually think about their advisors first, their board should fire them, because that's not even in like a top 10 line item in terms of profitability. So it's a problem.
It's funny. It's funny you mention it, because, I was pitched on the idea after I'd gone independent, and I saw a difference. I saw a difference in kind of the mood or the sentiment of the people that did sell a majority or a portion even. And for the ones that didn't, it was like, well, if you're going to do that, we're going to treat you a little better. And if not, whatever.
I've gotten it. What are we on? Tuesday. I've had 2 calls in a day and a half, 2 days, with situations like that. Hey, my firm is clearly pivoted. I'm no longer important. I already kind of felt out on an island. No one picks up my calls. It's that this happens every firm, right? I'm not, there's not one firm I'm picking on, because there's a lot of good people at these firms. The people aren't the problem. It's just, how do you scale it? How do you create efficiencies? And then how do you create like standard operating procedures? It's very difficult and fascinating, because if you want to acquire, you got to make it part of your business model, right? You got to prospect. You got to, even if it's an hour a week, 2 hours a week, go have a lunch, go have a dinner, talk to your wholesalers. Everybody wants to buy, but no one's really ready. And then you have these RIAs and hybrids that are playing the revenue game, right? They can package it up. And some of the capital partners, they have stakes in 7, 8, 9, 10 different firms. There are some good firms that are doing good work, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I think the ones, I talked to 2 hybrids in the last week, and they've been very specific. They stayed out of that game, because sometimes you get multiple partners, 14, 15 different partners. And then how do you reinvest back into your firm when everyone's gotta eat, right? And gotta live and pay bills? It's hard to really grow when you do that. But there are some firms that are purposely not for sale. They're staying in their lane. And hey, I have an RIA, but I really want to focus on the OSJ model. And the RIA is really for particular reasons. And it's hard to be all things to all people, as we're finding out.
Yeah, for sure. What's next in our business? Where do you see things going? Obviously, there's been this rushed independence, but you're also seeing this salary roll thing take place in the broker-dealer world. The bank channels are definitely like, it's teaming up, like, the push to team everybody. I've kind of seen that coming through there. But what's next for the overall business? What does this business look like in 10 years?
Yeah, it's such a fun and fascinating question. You asked me that when we talked yesterday. In some regards, nothing has changed. It's kind of like Mark Twain's quote, right? history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes a lot. And so you think about the explosion of broker dealers, and then you start to see the M&A, the consolidation, and then you see the explosion of RIAs. Now I'm working with advisors that are like, okay, I conquered the RIA, I built it, I made it, but I don't really want to do it. It's taking up too much time. So you're starting already to see some of the consolidation of the RIA, and it'll still be a positive number where RIAs are growing, because we're not quite there yet in terms of, of that trend. You're seeing more teams. I mean, clearly the wirehouses are pushing that. The banks are pushing that for obvious reasons, stickiness. They want the assets on platform. And as much as everybody wants to rail against the big three, big four RIA or wirehouses, they still control a lot of the assets. There's some firms, like LPL and some of the firms that are offering more of the build-out models and the W-2 models that are making some headway, but there's still literally trillions of dollars at these firms. And so, and then the other side, think of it like a clock, right? It's 12 o'clock. So you're at SunTrust or Wells or whatever, you're at your W-2 firm. Then you go independent, you're duly registered. Let's say that's 3 o'clock. And then you go hybrid, which is your 6 o'clock. And then maybe you go fee only at 9 o'clock. And then 12 o'clock comes. 1 in every 5 advisors, roughly, that's independent, is going back to some type of employee model. It doesn't mean you lose control of your clients or your brand, but what it does mean is you're now W-2 again. So it's fascinating to see everything come full circle. And you get some of these senior executives leaving Merrill and Morgan, some of these firms, creating these big aggregators, and they're taking on capital partners. Who do they sell back to? It's just like rinse and repeat. It's literally mind-numbing where you have one place to go back to.
Yeah.
Private equity, Wall Street. And so here we are again. So, but at least along the way, you get to unlock the value and create something for yourself and your family, and hopefully for your employees. If you're a good owner and a partner, and it's kind of like you can go fast alone, but together you can go farther. So if you can help create something cool and unlock that for your family and your community, and ideally your clients, that's the key. But it's like we're right back to where we started in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's that was the funny thing about the offer to buy. For me to sell a portion, I was like, well, I just went independent. Like I'm already selling the business that I just went independent for. And obviously that, to me, that didn't make sense at the time, and it still doesn't make quite sense, at 42, like you said, if it was 55, 60, 65, maybe you're
right. Well, you want to continue to work unless you're totally over the industry. And there are folks like that, like compliance, and they've just been getting beat up for 30 and 40 years. And, we had a nice 12-year run where the markets were virtually cooperated. And now that, these last several months it's been tough on a lot of folks.
Yep.
And so, well, maybe I won't hang on, or maybe I need some help. And that's the hard part is a lot of advisors, we talk about retirement and helping our clients, but they have to stop and think about their own future. Like, what is next? Am I evolved? Do I have grandkids? Is there a hobby? Is there a passion? Is there another business I can do? Can I buy a Chick-fil-A or a franchise and help my kids? I mean, what does your own retirement look like? And a lot of folks, from a mental standpoint, they're stressed. They're dealing with all kinds of things. This job is stressful. The industry is stressful, and they haven't taken the time to map out their own retirement, so to speak.
Yeah, which is important. We're so focused on our clients. Occasionally, we need to focus on ourselves. Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure. I got one more question for you. Well, obviously, give out your contact info. I think you'd be a huge resource for a lot of people listening today. What's the one thing you want people to walk away from this podcast, listening to Mike, listening to somebody that's been in this business for a long time on different avenues? What's the one thing you want people to walk away with?
One of the reasons I was excited to talk with you is because you literally said, hey, I've got no agenda. And I don't have an agenda. Whether I work with an advisor or not, I'm going to be fine. Family's going to be fine. And this is not the whole takeaway close that you talked about during your recruiting process. But truly, there's so many opportunities in our space. The thing that I get frustrated with is there's a lot of miscommunication, a lot of bad information. And I don't necessarily think people believe that they're hoodwinking people. It's just there's not enough experience, right? You could be telling the truth, but it's a half truth. So as an example, if I go to a broker dealer and I want to create my own RA, I can do that. Well, maybe I get assessed the penalty, or maybe my pricing changes. So you want to know what you're getting into. And so for me, I'm just trying to help as many people as possible. I talked to Nick Nielsen, like, how many people have you helped? And there's the Kevin Costner movie where he's like the Coast Guard, and Ashton Kutcher asked him the question, "What's your number? What's your number?" The whole movie, "What's your number? How many people have you saved?" And he finally breaks down and says, "My number's whatever, 13, I think it was." He's like, "Well, you're this legend, you're this hero. You've only saved 13 people." And he literally says, I get goosebumps when I tell the story, I've lost 13. Like, I count the people that I couldn't help and that I couldn't save. And so there's probably too many of those people to count, but you don't know your options until you have a conversation.
Yep.
So I don't care whether you've got 2 million or 2 billion, like you, here to help spread information. I do a lot of pro bono work where I work with like younger advisors and just making sure they're in a good spot. Because the one thing that the wirehouse does that a lot of independents can't do is they're still training these people. Like going to the bank program, it's a great way to learn the business. It's a great way to grow a book. Jones, some of these same thing. It's a good place to learn the business, but at some point you pay back the loyalty, and the loyalty card is handed back, and it's time to think about you and your future. And so just happy to help anybody that needs it.
Yeah, and the one thing I'd like to say, Mike, and again, I don't know you extensively. I know you from reputation. Reputation speaks volumes to me, but also watching you on LinkedIn and just even this conversation, having a consultant that somebody that knows the different areas that can explore your brand and your situation and be a resource is a phenomenal thing. And again, we've given Nick enough praise on the show today, but he did mention that, and that struck a bell with me, which is, I did not have that because, in my opinion, a lot of the recruiters out there are similar to a lot of old school brokers out there, that they're there for the quick commission and they're there for the quick sale. And, they try to act as if they're, and it is, simply help you. But, at the end of the day, they're getting paid by that. And I think a consultant type of situation is a phenomenal thing to bring to this business. And I wish you tons of success, because I think you're going to be phenomenal. And I'm glad you left where you left, because sometimes doing that and being free to give the proper advice is a better place to be. So, Mike, how can people get a hold of you?
Sure. Yeah. On LinkedIn, Michael Gordon, the website, which we'll revamp at some point, is just themichaelgordon.com. There's a long story behind that. I'm making a lot of mistakes that a lot of advisors make when they first go independent. But you can find me on LinkedIn, YouTube, starting to grow a presence there. And then my contact info, my email and cell phone number are literally right on my LinkedIn page. So it's just themichaelgordon.com. Happy to help in any way. And Evan, you've been wonderful. I've enjoyed listening to you for the last few weeks, getting to know you a little bit better. And like you said, I've known about you for several years. I remember when you went independent, and it's good to know we've got some common interests and some friends. And so I wish you nothing but success with the podcast. And hopefully you'll have me back if I don't insult too many people, and I can do it in person.
We love it. Laguna to Boca, maybe,
As long as there's a beach, I'm good. Your beach is a little warmer than mine, so I'll take it.
Yeah, but you got a prettier situation, so. Anyway, Mike, awesome show. Guys, everybody, you know how to get a hold of us, LinkedIn, Instagram. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. I think Mike brought a lot of cool advice and experience. And for any advisor that's looking or not looking, having somebody by your side is extremely helpful. So have a good day, and we'll see you in the next one.